Salvete Spectatores, Masopust talking. Geralt of Rivia, Gwynblade the White Wolf, the Butcher of Blaviken, Witcher, professional monster slayer. He's not only the hero in the games, but also the main protagonist of the books by Andrzej Sapkowski. But who is this guy, through whom we are able to experience the world of the Witch universe? Who is this white-haired swordsman, famous throughout the land? Well, let's start at the beginning. Our Witcher is probably the offspring of the druid and sorceress Visenna and the warrior Corin, but that's not sure. As a child, Visenna dumped him at the castle of Kaer Morhen, at the headquarters of the Witcher's School of the Wolf. There he was subdued to a rigorous training with the goal to become a Witcher. Now, what exactly is a Witcher, you may ask? A Witcher is a genetically enhanced and mutated elite warrior with superhuman strengths, reflexes, abilities, resistances and overall endurance, achieved by the consumption of basically drugs and mutagens. With the so-called trial of grasses, the Witchers alter their body in a way that makes them to what they are: mutants. As a result, Witches have cat-like eyes. Because Geralt endured the influences of the grasses extraordinarily well, he was chosen to be tested with even more advanced and dangerous experimental procedures. As the only one surviving those hard experiments, he lost all of his pigmentation, therefore his white hair. And therefore he's called the White Wolf. Wolf because of his school and white because of his hair. But he's now considered to be one of the best, or the best, the strongest Witcher alive. He's also definitely the most famous one. Usually Witchers are deployed by whomever fancies paying them a hefty Witcher's fee to take on monsters and beasts that plague the realms. However, being basically elite warriors, they can also be hired, or they are being hired for bodyguard duties and bounty hunting jobs. This should be prevented by a Witcher's code that doesn't allow them to kill humans, elves or dwarves. But as you can think about yourselves, that doesn't always work, as we see in the Assassins of Kings, where Geralt acts as a bodyguard to King Foltest and Letho gets hired by the Emperor of Nilfgaard to assassinate those kings Geralt wants to protect. Despite his name, Geralt does not originate from Rivia. He's called Geralt of Rivia because he chose his name as a young Witcher for himself. It's a tradition for witches to have a kind of recognizable and familiar name that maybe like Yennefer of Vengerberg, the sorceress, they just have their city surnames to be recognizable, I think. Later he became a knight, a noble with the now official term of Rivia, because he rescued Queen Meve, the Queen of Lyria, Queen Meve's life during the War of Nilfgaard. He was knighted on the battlefield, and therefore he is now not some peasant rebel, but a real knight, a real noble, and of Rivia is official. Interestingly enough, Geralt is also considered a possible mage, or at least somewhat of a source, because of his mother's magical abilities. He could have become a mage, but declines when offered a magical education to reasons I don't really can follow, because he already does some kind of magic with his signs. The Witcher signs are basically magic on a weak level. Now to some more personal stuff. Our hero is, in the books at least, a lone wolf, a solemn, sarcastic, nihilistic and realistic character. He can also be romantic, but most of the time he's a realist. He doesn't like a black and white view on things and tries to get to the bottom of it. He tries not to judge by first glance. He can be relentless and stubborn, sometimes humorous and friendly, though a smile is seldom seen on his face. He tries to stay out of politics and refers to the famous Witcher's neutrality. This concept, however, is altered somewhat as the story advances in the books and especially now in the games, leading Geralt further and further away from his originally neutral Witcher's path and more towards the actions and influences of men, kings and empires. so he starts to meddle in politics. And in The Witcher 2 Assassin of Kings we even can change the course of whole battles and, well, the painting of maps, so to speak. That leads us to the one thing that determines all of his later actions and decisions in the books, and as it looks also in The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. One word: Ciri. Or Cirilla, as her real name goes. Ciri is the daughter of Pavetta and Duni, the de jure rightful queen of Sintra and bearer of the Elder Blood. You will hear about her at a later point. Although Geralt doesn't believe in the concept of destiny, he marked Ciri with the law of surprise to be his destiny. He completed a mission for Pavetta and Duni, her parents, successfully and therefore demanded unknowingly the unborn Ciri as payment. That is called the law of surprise. When she turned out to be a girl, however, Geralt rejected her, but destiny forced her on him. They met thrice. It was so unlikely, and nevertheless they always met, that at some point Geralt realized that Ciri was his destiny, and he kind of adopted her as his own daughter and took her to Kaer Morhen, the Witcher's base, if you remember, to become a female Witcher. Now, there are no female witches, and she didn't become a full Witcher because the mage Triss Merigold prevented them from that, and later she was educated to becoming a mage, but we talk about Ciri another time. Because Ciri is of the Elder Blood and rightful queen of Sintra, different parties have an interest in her, and she's abducted. In the second book, yes. The following search for her marks a red line and a lot of the storyline in the books. So Geralt's quest is to rescue Ciri from all the evil guys that want her for one thing or another. So Geralt tries everything to bring her back to safety. For that he commits crimes, he murders, he has little scruples and can be especially furious when his friends and loved ones are threatened. He is friends with the dwarf Sultan Shiva and Yarpen Sigrin, who he met along the way, along his quests. The bard Dandelion he considers his best friend, and Dandelion is an important character because he, as a bard and some kind of a historian, he records all of Geralt's decisions and events and what happens around the world, and sometimes we read the events through his eyes, or more like through his feather, through his white writings. And if you were a nerd and read all the bestiary entries and journal entries, you may have noticed that all of these are written through Dandelion's eyes. So what he experienced, what he saw, and not a neutral or Geralt perspective, so that's interesting. Also, the sorceress Triss Merigold is a friend, and a friend with benefits, so to say, to Geralt. We, of course, can choose her to become his love interest in the games, and that's, in the second game, it's somewhat predetermined. But the love of his life is the sorceress Yennefer of Wengerberg, whom we will meet in the third Witcher, that's confirmed. Last but not least, let's touch upon the connections between the books and the games, the Wild Hunt, the cavalcade of wraiths that abduct children. Now, the phenomenon is not entirely clear to me either, so well, we'll talk about that later too. Geralt's presumed end comes when he, in the books comes when he tries to protect non-humans in a pogrom in Rivia and gets gutted by a pitchfork-wielding boy. He's rescued, however, by Ciri, and what then happens is also not entirely clear. Much is explained in flashbacks throughout The Witcher 2, and what basically happens is that Yennefer is abducted by the Wild Hunt, Geralt follows them and changes his soul or his life for hers. The king of the Wild Hunt agrees, and so Yennefer is dropped somewhere in Nilfgaard, but now Geralt joins the Wild Hunt, and after joining the Wild Hunt he ends up with amnesia and close to death somewhere near Kaer Morhen. That's a total mystery to me, why he was able to get away from the Wild Hunt and what the Wild Hunt wants with him. The Wild Hunt is maybe... It's a cavalcade of elves from another universe that sometimes come in corporal form, but most of the time they only send their wraith form to this world to roam the skies, but they can come in a physical form. As a somewhat strange. At this point, the events of the first Witcher game set in. The connections and interactions between Geralt, Ciri and the Wild Hunt will be the key in the main storyline of The Witcher 3, I'm sure. So, I hope I was able to give you a nice quick overview of our protagonist with this summary, and you should be fit now for playing Geralt in the third Witcher game. And I thank you all for watching, listening in this case again, and see you soon.